Thank you very much indeed, Dan. Everyone hear me okay? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So the first thing to say is that, slightly bizarrely for a security conference, I'm not really going to be talking exactly about security. I'm going to be talking about trust, and this project that I'm going to talk about, a project called Faith, was or is being supported by the Technology Strategy Board as part of their Trusted Services call. And one of the things that sort of occurred to us as we were writing the proposal and developing the project is that when people think of trusted services, they tend to think of things like, sort of internet banking and money exchange and logins and so on. And we didn't want to really talk about that. We wanted to talk about trust between people, primarily, and how you build trust between people using IT systems. And that's going to be the focus of the next 20 minutes or so. So the first thing to say is, why might you care about trust? Right? I mean, what's the advantage to you as a business or to you as a researcher about thinking about trust? And there's really sort of three areas that you can think of. The first one is obviously a sort of social aspect. It feels good to be trusted, right? Basically, your employers are going to like it if they're working in an environment where they feel trusted. They're going to feel more positive if they're working in a business that is perceived as being trusted. But perhaps more interestingly, there's also direct kind of economic benefits to having a lot of trust between people within an organization and between organizations. Most people here are in the business of securing systems, and that actually, of course, is there's money to be spent there, right, and money to be made there. It's an expensive business to actually protect your services and your system properly. And one of the things with trust is that the more trust that you have in an organization, or the more trust that you have in people, the less checking you tend to do. And we'll come and look at that in a bit more detail in a minute. But the point about this is that checking and being, essentially a little bit paranoid is an expensive operation. It's not as expensive as getting it wrong, of course, but there is an expense there. And if you can create a system that engenders trust between people within an organization and between organizations, then you can actually generate some cost savings, and we'll have a look at that in a minute. And then the last reason why you might care about trust is, of course, reputation. The reputation of your business and the reputation of the individuals, again, to be sort of perceived as trustworthy. So for us, we kind of went through this and then thought, well, actually, what is it that makes a business or an organization be perceived as trustworthy? What is it makes the individuals perceived as trustworthy? And we were focusing particularly on an area where there's often mistrust, and that's the relationship between members of the general public, councils, and contractors. So people that the council contract to do things like highways maintenance. I mean, we were focused particularly on highways maintenance, but it could be anything that the council contracts out. It could be litter picking. It could be coming to clean the drains, right? It's the council, the general public, and some contractors. And it's those trust relationships between the various parties and within those organizations that we were particularly looking at. And our idea was that if we could drive up trust between those three, we might actually be able to save money in the way that the councils use their contractors. So that was kind of the idea. Can we improve trust between these different parties and within these different organizations to try and actually save money? That was really what it came down to. So to try and do this and try and get an insight into what made the organizations trust each other or not trust each other, we had a workshop. We had 2 days where we got a collection of highways maintenance people, a collection of councillors, a collection of IT and systems providers and members of the general public together and started to talk about what actually generates trust within the organization or between the organizations and what the factors are that affect that. And the first one, of course, is evidence. I mean, people start usually from one of two different positions depending on their sort of basic approach to life. Either you're completely trusting of people and then you sort of keep trusting them until you get some evidence that they're not trustworthy, or you go the other way around. You're sort of quite paranoid and you don't trust anybody, and then you gradually build up trust based on evidence. And so one of the key things that immediately became apparent was that how do you actually share that evidence between these various stakeholders, and how do you kind of make that visible? So we started to think about ways that you could build systems that would support identification and persistent storage of that actual evidence, so that if you're coming afresh and you're one of these people who basically mistrusted everyone until you got the evidence, how do you actually just walk up and say, well, actually, here is an evidence base that I can use to actually maintain and build up trust in people. The second issue that you notice very quickly with trust, particularly sort of within organizations, is this idea of complexity, and in particular the complex organizational structures and processes that you tend to get. So what we found was that when you talk to people, they often don't understand the implications of their actions. So, for example, I'll be sitting here and I've got 10 things to process on my desk, and I get 5 of them done, and then I go for lunch. And I actually have no idea of the consequences of not getting to those second group of 5 before lunch. I had no idea that other people were waiting on that information. And we particularly saw that in the highway sector, where, for example, they'd have to fill out a whole series of forms and job reports, and the workers on the ground really had no idea what actually the role of those forms were, who was actually going to look at them, if anybody. And so trying to kind of give the people a sense of actually understanding the processes and the dependencies on the information that they're generating, the evidence that they're generating, again, helps you kind of build up some trust. There's an issue about expectations, of course, and here what we're looking at is when people have an expectation that you're going to do something and then you fail to do it, that erodes trust more directly than almost anything else. And in that workshop, we were asking all these stakeholders, what is it that causes you to lose trust in somebody? It's basically they failed to live up to expectations. I was expecting them to process these 10 job forms before lunch, and they didn't. They only processed 5 of them. And one of the challenges with this notion of trust, of course, is that it's really, really hard to earn trust, and it's incredibly easy to lose it. Right? You can spend a long, long time building up trust, and then you do one thing, you screw up one thing, and people really notice it, and immediately their trust kind of falls away. It's like there's no damping on this system. Right? What you'd like to have is it kind of gradually building up, and then it slips back a bit and goes forwards and slips back. It doesn't tend to do that. You tend to have trust, 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 bang, something happened, and it can be actually quite a small thing. They said they'd return this form, they didn't return the form, and your trust actually in them just kind of really drops very, very markedly. So this idea about doing kind of expectation management is very important, and in particular trying to give people within the organizations a sense that of the impact that they're going to have if they don't actually meet a particular expectation. So the question is, when I'm sitting there at my desk and I've got these 10 forms to process, did I actually know that somebody was really genuinely expecting me to process all 10? And if I did, how, or if I didn't, how do you actually tell me this is the expectation, and this person, you've failed to deliver this form to them on time 2 or 3 times before, and if you fail again, you're really going to be in trouble from a trust perspective. So trying within the context of the IT systems to give people warnings about the implications of their actions, we felt was kind of important there. And then, of course, there's this issue of accountability. And again, this is a sort of relatively straightforward thing, but it's basically trying to say not just how I visualize my impact on people's expectations, but also what the impact of my actions are on the systems and the processes that are out there, and how you make sure that people can see what those impacts are going to be, and to actually be able to visualize that was considered important. So we took the output from this workshop, and we took these set of concerns that the people had about trust and the issues that they'd identified, and tried to look at a very concrete case study and say, if we were to increase trust between the various stakeholders here, could we actually generate sort of reputational improvements? Could we generate social improvements? Could we generate economic improvements? And one of the good things about working with sort of councils and highways contractors and the general public is that the level of trust between the three is generally quite low, right? So the bar is generally quite low. If you can drive up a little bit of trust, if you can get the general public to just kind of stop and think, yeah, actually the council, that there is a reason why they're resurfacing this road and not this one. If you can say, there is a reason why my bins didn't get collected today. Similarly, if you can sort of say to people, well, actually, when you phone up and you say, the binman missed my bin, what you're hoping for is them to go, oh, we're so sorry, and send out another truck, rather than for them to be at the other end of the phone thinking, really? Or did you actually oversleep and not put your bin out? Right, so you want to kind of build up the trust between these three parties. And if you can do that, then we think you can generate these benefits. And we focus particularly on the role of inspections. So in highways maintenance at the moment, typically what happens is, let's say there's a pothole outside your house, right? And you phone up the council and you say, you know what, there's a pothole in the road outside my house. The first thing the council tend to do is to send out an inspector to check, is there really a pothole? It's not immediately obvious why they don't believe you. I mean, I can't genuinely imagine many people phoning up just for a laugh to say there's a pothole, but clearly they want to send somebody out to check there's a pothole. They then go, yes, there's a pothole, and then they'll pass that information on to the highways contractor. The highways contractor typically will then send out their own inspector to make sure that the first inspector got the job right, that there really is a pothole. Okay, very good. Then they'll go out and send a team to actually do the work. Then, typically, the contractor will send out another inspector to do a quality assurance, have they actually filled the hole properly, and then the council finally will send somebody out to check the pothole was filled, that they can actually pay the contractor. So what you're starting to see is a very simple problem. There's a hole in the road. Somebody phones up and reports there's a hole in the road, and this whole wealth of inspections that are all simply based on the fact that actually you want assurance that there really is a pothole, you want assurance that you're paying for somebody to fix the pothole properly and that the work is being done properly. And so we were looking at trying to understand these kinds of scenarios and how we could use sort of IT systems to kind of build up the trust between the various players. And in this case, the case study I'm going to talk about today is one to do with gully cleaning. So this is cleaning drains, basically. And the drains by the side of the road all get cleaned pretty regularly, and if they don't get cleaned, then you get surface water and you get flooding. It's a big problem, particularly if you live close to one of these roads, because it's going to flood not just the road, but it's going to flood your house. So cleaning these drains is actually incredibly important. And the question for the councils and the contractors and the public is very simple. How do you know that they're being cleaned? You're paying money for them to be cleaned. How do you make sure that they are actually cleaned on time? Well, the traditional approach is you have a lot of paper. You have a fixed schedule that says something like clean the drains every 6 months, clean the drains every year, and you get the gully crews, the gully cleaning crews, to fill out lots and lots of bits of paper. They tend to not know why they're filling out the paper. They tend to fill out the paper retrospectively because, it's cold and wet and miserable when you're cleaning drains by the side of the road. You're not going to sit there and fill out a load of detailed paperwork. And so you tend to go and do a lot of inspections. But inspecting a gully to find out if it's been cleaned is really hard. I mean, if there's nothing in it, is that because it was empty already or because they actually cleaned it? And so this is a problem within the industry. It's been going on for a long time. And it's actually very expensive to clean drains, and it's critical that you get it right. So the system that we looked at building, or that we did build, basically tried to provide computer support to replace all of those paper records. But much more importantly, tried to kind of empower the workers so they could actually understand the information they were collecting, who would see that information, where that information would be used, and also to let them make some decisions. So, for example, this gully, it's always clean and running. We don't need to worry. We don't need to clean it. And in particular, we don't need to clean it, and we can say to the system, we're not cleaning it because it's always clean and running, and not just because we're, not cleaning it to try and save a few pounds. So the system was created. It lets the gully cleaners actually tag automatically with GPS locations which gullies they're cleaning, the state of the gullies. They can report faults. They can actually look at sort of things like heat maps and try and decide which gullies to clean. And then based on that, so for example, this sort of heat map here is showing different silt levels in gullies around Morecambe, so they're able to kind of decide which ones to actually go out and clean and which ones to prioritize. So for the general public, that also helps because they can say, oh yeah, they're cleaning the drains that are blocked. They're not just going and cleaning any random drain. And the guys in the office who are actually doing the scheduling see exactly the same view of the data. And that's completely revolutionized that part of the maintenance sector, because instead of having a lot of paper and a lot of inspections, now they have very few inspections and they have almost no paper, because the system is basically collecting that data. It's getting stamped with the GPS locations of the gullies, so it's harder for the crews not to accurately report it. But also there's that sense of kind of awareness, so the gully crews know that data is being collected and made visible both to the managers, but also potentially out and on to the general public. So there's much more care taken in things like taking photographs of the gullies and reporting the gully state. So based on that case study, and it took us sort of 2 years to do that, to actually go out, capture the data, build the system, and then start to see sort of real kind of commercial benefits from that. Based on that, we came up with a sort of series of recommendations or guidelines, if you like, that they're actually published as design guidelines for building out systems that enhance trust. I'm going to skip through the points relatively quickly, but we can give you a reference if you're interested in reading more about this. So these are if you're building an IT system and you want to improve trust, or you want to use that IT system to improve trust, here's some things that you clearly need to think about. So the first one is obviously presumably dear to everyone's heart here, right? You have to have some sense of security in the system. People have to believe that the data in the system, won't be tampered with, is protected. Perhaps more surprisingly, we found that the performance of the system made a big difference, particularly with the mobile workers. When we had versions of the system that were quite slow, what they tried to do in the field, of course, was to design around them, right? So they would work around them so they wouldn't fill out the data in a timely fashion. So then the data is out of date or it's incorrect, and that clearly has a sort of negative impact. We care about provenance, obviously, and being able to sort of say, well, you collected this data on this drain, here's the sort of sequence of events, and here's who actually collected that data. And clearly, if you're going to build systems that try and enhance trust, you need to provide people with some provenance, some evidence of that trustworthiness of the data. We found that we wanted to support in the systems that we looked at this notion of translucency. So there's an argument that says when you're trying to build trust, you should have open systems. Everybody should be able to see everything, right? Transparency is the way to go. Our argument is actually that translucency, so kind of partial transparency, is much better, because if you make a system completely transparent, if you say to somebody, anything you write in this system, anybody else can see, the first thing that happens is people become incredibly cautious about what they write. And you probably see this in many cases where, for example, people stop sending emails and start phoning each other because they just simply don't want that record, they don't want that log. And so our argument was that the way you fill out these forms is very different if you think it's going to be seen by somebody who understands the problem domain versus, for example, a member of the general public. And so we wanted to try and support that notion of translucency. We think that's important. You clearly have to have systems that have a sort of sense of flexibility when the data that you're collecting can't be collected for some reason. So again, taking the gully cleaning example, quite often you won't be able to accurately capture the GPS data. You're in an urban canyon or something. And the question is then, what do you do, basically? What you'd really like people to be able to do is to manually position where they cleaned the drains, and to provide a sort of audit trail that says, yes, I cleaned the drains and I moved the data for the right reason. You want to provide value to users, and that was very important to us. In that application, we empowered the workers, and they then saw a huge benefit. They reported things like greater job satisfaction. And felt like when the public talked to them in the street about what they were doing, they were better able to defend that because they could actually show them the reason that they were doing particular pieces of work. And so this kind of value to users and empowerment we think is a really important topic. And the last one is, of course, you drive up sort of competence for people. Again, you're driving up competence for the workers themselves. So take-home messages: lack of trust has social and economic costs. Trust is hard to earn and easy to lose, but you can design IT systems to try and build that trust. And they are giving you a sort of handful of pointers that we've used successfully to actually do these systems that have delivered actual real benefits, both economically and within the organisation. So with that, I'll finish. Thank you very much.